So in our last slide, I asked you to define the meaning of respiratory medium and respiratory surface. And hopefully you came up with the fact that respiratory medium is the source of oxygen. And it's where the animal is living. So some animals live in water and they need to get oxygen from the water, or many animals are terrestrial and they get oxygen from the air. So the respiratory medium is where the oxygen's coming from. It's going to be either air or water. And then the respiratory surface is the part of an animal's body where the gas exchange occurs. So let's kind of dig into this a little bit more. So there are two kinds of respiratory media are air and water, and both of these have advantages and disadvantages. So for air, the big advantage to animals that live on land and breathe air is that oxygen is plentiful in the air. The atmosphere is about 21% atmosphere. 21% of the atmosphere is oxygen. Sorry, I don't know if I said that right, but there's a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere. And then also air flows really easy. It's not viscous at all. It's not hard to make the air move. And in contrast, in water, oxygen availability is always less than in air. Oxygen can dissolve in the water, but there's way less oxygen in the water than there would be in the air. And if the air is warm or salty, then it can hold even less oxygen compared to cold, fresh water. So if you fish, you probably have a sense of this, because if you're fishing in a stream, you know that the best place to find the fish is often where the water is running fast. That water is coldest and often has the highest oxygen, and often that's where you'll find the fish. Another disadvantage of water compared to air is that water is more dense and viscous. If you think about trying to move the water past your respiratory surface, that takes a lot more energy than to move air. So breathing in air and breathing out air is easy, but imagine if you had to breathe in water. It would not be as easy. So what would be the disadvantage of air? Well, the main disadvantage of air is that your respiratory surface would dry out. So let's talk about respiratory surfaces. So respiratory surfaces always have to be moist. So a respiratory surface is a part of the animal's body that the oxygen gas is going to diffuse across. Carbon dioxide would also have to diffuse across. So this surface always has to be moist to allow that diffusion to take place. And remember that gases move entirely by diffusion. Gases are not going to be moving by active transport. They are just simply going to diffuse across plasma membranes. And diffusion, the rate of diffusion is always proportional to the surface area and inversely proportional to the distance across which that respiration has to happen. So that means if we know these characteristics, what would you predict the structure of a respiratory surface is going to be? I'll just pause for a second and think about that. What is a respiratory surface going to be like if it always has to be moist and if gases are moving entirely by diffusion? Hopefully you'll come up with this answer. A respiratory surface always has to be very thin so that there is a very short distance across which the gases have to move. And there's going to be a large surface area so that there's a lot of area that those gases can diffuse across. And then that surface always has to be moist. So what are some examples? So some kinds of animals don't have a specialized respiratory surface, and instead their entire epithelium just serves as the respiratory surface. So if you remember when we talked about sponges, we talked about how their body plan allows for all of their cells to be in direct contact with the water all the time. And so all their cells can just be absorbing oxygen from the water. The oxygen easily diffuses to all the cells through the epithelium. Cnidarians would be animals like jellyfish or hydras. And again, they have a very thin body wall and all of their cells are very close to the surface. Then some animals use their skin as a respiratory surface, and then underneath the skin, they have a circulatory system that is in close contact with the skin. So animals like earthworms and amphibians, they are able to use their skin as their respiratory organ. Now, notice that this requires these animals to live in a damp environment so that that respiratory surface always stays moist. But why is it that most organisms need a specialized respiratory organ? And I'll pause here and let you answer this question as your next question.